Theoretically, the crew of the Starship Enterprise has always been the best that Starfleet had to offer. In practice, the Enterprise crew has to make decisions that lead to exciting television, which means those decisions are often terrible. Here are the worst things the crew of the Starship Enterprise have ever done. Lieutenant Commander Geordi LaForge is undeniably great at his job. There's a reason he's the chief engineer of the Federation's flagship. His knowledge of the Enterprise and its systems is unparalleled, and his skills have saved the ship and its crew countless times. He's also kind of a sex creep who makes the 24th century equivalent of a real doll and then gets really weird about it when the woman he based it on shows up in person. It all goes down, so to speak, in the Next Generation's third season, in which the Enterprise gets snared into an ancient trap that's draining the ship's power and threatening to kill the crew with deadly radiation. In order to solve the problem, Geordi conjures up a holodeck version of the engine's designer, Dr. Leah Brahms. Over the course of the next 40 minutes, Geordi and Holobrahms get increasingly thirsty for each other, culminating in the virtual woman giving a speech that takes his engineering duties in a surprisingly erotic direction.
Every time you look at this engine, you're looking at me. Every time you touch it, it's me.
All things considered, it's actually not that weird, and it's really just what viewers assumed everyone did on the holodeck anyway. The problem comes when the real Dr. Brahms shows up a year later to inspect the ship and turns out to be a little more standoffish than Geordi expects. Which makes sense, since they've never actually met before. Eventually, she discovers his Leah Brahms dating simulator on the holodeck and understandably freaks out that this dude she just met has been doing Q knows what with her virtual counterpart for a year. The worst part? The show presents this as Dr. Brahms, who feels, quote, invaded and violated by some incel engineer using her image as a, quote, fantasy plaything, as being in the wrong. And the episode ends up with her apologizing to him over drinks. Wolf in the Fold is one of the strangest episodes of the original Star Trek, and in retrospect feels a lot more like an episode of Doctor Who in the way it mixes history with the sci-fi take on the supernatural. It starts off interestingly enough with a trip to the sexy planet of Argelius that goes bad when Scotty is accused of murdering a belly dancer. It turns out the whole reason the Enterprise came to Argelius in the first place was that Captain Kirk wanted to take a trip to a planet full of people who, quote, think very highly of their pleasure, which is a very TV in 1967 way of saying they were down to boldly go to the bone zone at warp 6.9. The reason? According to McCoy, they're trying to cure Scotty of his, quote, total resentment toward women. That's yikes number one. Eventually, things start to get really weird when it turns out the murders were actually perpetrated by Red Jack, an intangible space ghost known on Earth as the infamous 19th century serial killer Jack the Ripper. Red Jack, you see, is a parasitic organism that feeds on fear and drives its host to attack women for some pretty unenlightened reasons.
And I suspect preys on women because women are more easily and more deeply terrified, generating more sheer horror than the male of the species.
And that's yikes number two. Since Scotty didn't actually kill the dancer, and the rest of the crew wound up putting an end to a 400-year-old murder ghost, you might be wondering how this ends up on a list of the worst things the crew's ever done. That comes immediately after, when there are still dead bodies cooling in the conference room and everyone's high on drugs that make them happy instead of terrified, which is when they decide to celebrate by beaming back down for some more sexy action like it's the end of Caddyshack. Everyone's reaction to dealing with a series of horrific serial killings is different, but we can all agree that this probably isn't a good one. Despite the fact that he's an android and therefore an artificial life form, Data is rarely considered anything other than a valued member of the Enterprise crew. In fact, the episode where he goes on trial to prove that he's not just a piece of property, The Measure of a Man, is not only the best episode of TNG's otherwise dismal second season, it's one of the best episodes of the series, hands down. The thing is, he's still a robot running on what is essentially a massively powerful computer nobody really understands, and eventually that's going to be a problem. Witness, for instance, Brothers from Season 4. After a hidden command in his programming activates, Data hijacks the Enterprise, shuts off the life support on the bridge to get rid of his organic crewmates, turns off communications so they can't call for help, locks everyone out of the controls by impersonating Captain Picard's voice so accurately that it fools the ship's computer, and then bails, knocking out or neutralizing the Enterprise's entire security team in the process. In less than 10 minutes, he has rendered the most advanced starship in the galaxy completely defenseless and cut off from the rest of the Federation. Oh, and all of this happens during a medical emergency where a child is in danger of dying if they don't get him to a starbase soon. It all ultimately turns out to be okay. The signal came from Data's dad, bringing him home for what was basically a software update for Data's operating system. And once that's done, Data is welcomed back with open arms. Still, the fact that Data has the ability to utterly destroy the Enterprise, and that it can be activated whenever someone hacks into his brain and hits the right button, is not great. Oh well, it's a good thing the Enterprise never has to deal with any enemies based around advanced technology and networked computer systems with a history of taking over sentient creatures and making them do their murderous bidding, right? They might not be quite as advanced as the later generations of the franchise, but the Federation we see in the original Star Trek is still pretty far beyond the present, scientifically speaking. They've got ships that can travel faster than light, teleportation technology, and all kinds of high-tech weaponry. It's pretty surprising then, so many episodes are about the Enterprise finding something weird and then poking it to see what happens. The most egregious example? The show's 5th episode, The Naked Time, in which a virus rapidly spreads among the crew that essentially gets everyone drunk until the whole crew is brawling, making out, or running around with a sword and no shirt on. It nearly causes the destruction of the Enterprise, and you can blame it all squarely on Lieutenant Tormolen. While investigating a science lab that was completely destroyed and full of dead bodies, this idiot, who was wearing a full hazmat suit, decided to take his gloves off, start touching stuff, and then immediately wipe his nose because he had the sniffles. The worst part, though, is that he gets a full exam from Dr. McCoy when he returns to the ship, and the doctor finds nothing amiss. Jean-Luc Picard has a very good reason for hating the Borg. Not only are they some of Starfleet's deadliest enemies, with a staggering cosmic body count racked up on their mission to assimilate the galaxy, they also transformed Picard himself into their spokesman, Locutus. Picard was forced to watch, a prisoner in his own body, as he was controlled by the Borg and made to order the deaths of over 11,000 of his fellow officers, the crews of 39 ships, in the massacre at Wolf 359. It's pretty understandable then that he'd want some revenge, a desire that gives Patrick Stewart one of his most memorably awesome moments of scenery chewing in Star Trek First Contact.
This is about saving the future of humanity!
Jean-Luc, blow up the damn ship!
No!
His reaction to finding a single stranded Borg drone in Season 5's I, Borg, though, is much more understated and a lot more sinister. The captain eventually grows to understand that the drone, who takes the name Hugh, has the capacity to exist as an individual. The road to get there, however, is marked by suspicion, fury, and one stone-cold moment where Picard suggests that they infect his cybernetic brain with a computer virus meant to function as a terminal disease that will spread throughout the entire Borg collective. The crew winds up debating it, and Riker's fully on board, with Worf more on the side of just straight-up murdering a defenseless prisoner. Picard's desire for revenge is one thing, and putting a stop to a galactic menace is another. Will Riker advocating for full-on cybernetic genocide, and Worf trying to violate the Geneva Convention is a bit far for the utopian morality of the 24th century. Thanks to characters like the logical Spock, the emotion-free Data, and even noted Shakespeare nerd Captain Picard, Star Trek has always been considered one of the more thoughtful and intellectual of the major sci-fi franchises, something that's backed up by all those allegorical episodes about racism and the horrors of war. That makes it easy to forget that this is also a franchise that includes another canonical sex planet where everyone goes on vacation, Risa, and that Commander Riker went there once and got so horny about VR Wii Sports that it almost killed the entire crew. It happened in TNG Season 5, and opens with Riker having a tryst with an alien lady named Itana. As they're frolicking, she gets him to try out a VR headset with a game about throwing a frisbee into a cone. It looks like the least fun you can have while still technically being a video game, but when he clears the level, he gets, how to put this, a look of intense ecstasy that provided visual reference for plenty of fan fiction scribes to use at the climax of their stories. Riker brings his terrible Google Glass back from vacation and starts handing them out to the crew, and before long, everyone's addicted, which turned out to be Atana's plan for hijacking the Enterprise the whole time. Fortunately, she didn't plan for Wesley Crusher, who stumbles into accidentally seeing his mom's O-face and understandably decides that he needs to put a stop to this by any means necessary. And really, when you've gotten so thirsty for video games that a teenage boy has to show up and save you, things have gotten well and truly out of hand. The crew on Star Trek Enterprise is usually more boring than actively terrible. The episode A Night in Sick Bay, however, features what might just be the single worst thing that a member of the Enterprise crew has ever done, for certain interpretations of crew. In order to give himself some company on his trek through the stars, Captain Jonathan Archer brings his pet beagle, Porthos, along for the ride. This seems like a good idea. Everyone loved it when Data had a cat, right? But it had some unforeseen consequences that really everyone should have seen coming. When Archer decides, for some reason, to bring Porthos down to a new planet with him, the dog, well, does what dogs do.
The Cretaceans consider the Alviera trees cultural treasures. Apparently, Porthos urinated on one of them.
And that's what they're insulted about?
In his own worst moment, Archer spends the entire episode griping about how it's all their fault that he took his dog down to their planet and destroyed one of their cultural treasures. But eventually, he makes amends with the Cretaceans by doing some ceremonial shirtless chainsawing. This is never explained, but there's one thing we know for sure. As bad as the rest of the crew aboard the various Starship's Enterprise might have been, none of them have ever peed on a religious artifact. That we know of. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.